Hey everyone, it's Michael Zipursky here, and today I'm with Chris Mele. Chris, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Chris, you are a software pricing strategist. You're a managing partner of Software Pricing Partners, and your clients include companies like IBM, Oracle, GE, HP, and many others. You were previously the CEO and co-founder of Cabinet
That's right.
Software, which was it's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? The number one business management ERP solution in the remodeling industry. Great to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's kind of start off and talk about your experience running your first company, Companion Cabinet Software. What was that all about?
Well, let's see. So when I was at Ernst & Young doing the consulting thing, they got me involved in engagement economics, which is code for, you get to see the billable rates to the client, which is probably the worst thing that you can ever show to one of your team members. So I concluded pretty early on that I was on the wrong side of the formula. Let's put it that way. And so a buddy of mine at Ernst & Young and I decided that we would start a software company. And I remember the password to the database. We were working in the time at Visual Basic, and I'm sacrificing all these summers building all this code. The password was $1 million in revenue by 2000 with an exclamation point, because that makes it extra secure. And so this was, the password, and little did I know it would be until 06 when we would make that. And I went through a stage where I had really long hair. I could kind of bite it, not because I was going hippie, but I literally could not afford a haircut, and things were really, really tight. And I think my parents were really worried about me at the time. But we attracted investment capital around 06, and then we made our way eventually to the cloud in 08. We were largely what they call on-prem software at the time. That was the dominant stuff that you did in the software space. And so, yeah, it was, I stared bankruptcy in the face twice in my career, very scary. And I think at one point before we took on investment capital, I think it was like about 190,000 in credit card debt. So that was the time when you could switch credit card offers and get 0% and keep extending the runway and get a little bit more credit. And you can't do that now because they charge you the transfer fee. But back then, you could build a whole business on a credit card, and that's what we did.
And how did things turn out for that business?
That was wonderful. It was one of the best educational experiences of my life. In 08, we were moving to the cloud, and then we hired software pricing partners to help us figure out how to price our intellectual property and our services. And then that's how I met the team here. And then ultimately, I was actually driving to Charlotte ready to accept another position at a software company to kind of continue that journey. And I talked to the founder at the time, and he was really upset that he couldn't find a partner. And just out of my mouth came, should we be having that conversation? And that's what it took. So then I did a very big right-hand turn on my career, and I love it. I mean, it's really amazing to deal with the kind of technology and the founders, and you get a real sense for all the tech that's being brought to market for COVID. And a lot of our clients are in healthcare. I mean, it's a very fascinating world. There's some really amazing stuff people are working on.
Yeah. Before we dive into pricing and more of what you're doing today, take us back to that time when you were running Companion Cabinet Software. And people often say you learn more from your mistakes or failures or challenges than you do from your successes. What advice would you offer someone who is going through their own entrepreneurial journey? Maybe they've encountered some of the downs, not just the ups. What lessons would you offer your daughter or son who are thinking about entrepreneurship, just from your experience?
So let's see. The first one I would say is the amount of time that you will spend raising capital is on par with or greater than the time you'll spend just attracting another customer. So I'd spend all my time, and it's funny because I actually teach as a guest speaker down on some of the campuses for entrepreneurial programs. And one of the things that always comes up is investors, and everybody's on this, ride to get the investors, build the company, have the unicorn in 3 years, and then retire in the Caribbean and built a wall around ourselves with a bunch of vaccines that nobody else can get into. And I think that if we just sort of stretch that runway out a little bit and have what we would call reasonable growth, healthy growth is really key. And healthy growth was really your understanding of your customers is superior to the competitors. And the only way you can get that is to be on the phone with some form of your service or product, maybe in an early form, and getting paid, not doing it for free. But the mistake that I see a lot of times that happens is the entrepreneur gets enamored with pitch events and other things and wants to take capital in and forgets that before you take capital in, the investor is going to say, well, before I write the check, can you just tell me what's in the pipeline and who it is that's about to buy? And therein lies the trap. And if you're not careful, you can vaporize you can lose a year on that.
Right.
And managing investors, we had a lot of them, is a full-time job. I mean, it can be very distracting.
It sounds, Chris, like, are you saying, is this really touching on the importance of focus? Do you think that that's a big challenge that a lot of people have in running their own businesses, that their focus lacks, and they end up looking at a lot of different shiny objects and opportunities and things that they could be doing with the hope of it, having a big impact, but oftentimes they overlook the basics of engaging with clients and customers and having more meaningful conversations?
Yeah, I'll never forget, there was a customer early on in my journey, and it was probably about a year or two after they bought. And here we are struggling with what it is we're going to build next and trying to attract a new customer and a new customer and a new customer. And I remember when I visited them, he had told me, he said, if you had just come back to me and offered me that, inventory management module, I would pay you 150 grand for that. And I scratched my head like, oh my gosh, like how did I? And so sometimes it's not 100 customers that you need, it's one or two, and a real focus on the problem that they're trying to solve. And mastering getting paid fairly for that is really critical. So a lot of our clients, especially if they don't have customers yet, or they're pre-revenue, or think about a larger company that's doing a first sort of launch into the marketplace with a new cloud offering, because maybe they're a little bit late to the party. You don't need a lot of customers to put some pretty big marks up on the wall. And if you were talking about potentially doing something very small, a 10 or 15 grand pilot, oftentimes that can get reconstructed if you listen and you spend your time and you're focused on that customer and how that workflow works and what it is that the problem is that you're trying to solve for them. You can take a 15 grand. If they're going to spend 15 grand with you, they'll spend 50, they'll spend potentially more depending on their size. And that is really often missed. And when you're sort of on your service, the question is, well, if I sell it at $100 an hour or $200 an hour, which don't get me started on the hourly rate, but if we sell a fixed work product for 10 grand, it's a very different ballgame if we can sell it for 25 grand, right? It just means a heck of a lot less customers. And that's a really lovely thing that happens, right? When you don't have to serve a million customers.
Definitely. What did things look like at your company, Companion Cabinet Software, before you engaged your current firm that you're now involved with? Like, what were you guys doing wrong, would you say, from a pricing perspective?
Looking at our costs.
Tell me about that. What do you mean?
In the software world, and when you're coming off a credit card debt, building your company, the biggest fight you'll get internally when you take in capital for the first time is the act of deploying it, because now the money comes in, there's a 2 million in the bank, and you're thinking, well, I gotta hold on to this. But the trick is you got to deploy it and turn that 2 million into 4 million, and et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, the critical thing I think of starting out with that, well, I lost my train of thought. Sorry, Michael.
That's all good.
Yeah, bring me back.
Yeah, no, I mean, so you're talking about your focus initially was on costs.
Oh,
and
that's
that
right.
that was a mistake. So kind of knowing what you know now, or what you learned when you engaged your current firm, Software Pricing Partners, what was the aha moment? What did you see like, wow, yeah, that's so different, or we should be doing things that new way? What was the gap?
Yeah, it's every time I think back to this time, it makes there's some moments that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. But when you're overly focused on costs, you're going to kneecap the ability for you to get paid fairly, right? So in the cloud or even on a service basis, you could be focused on, well, that resource is going to cost me $50 an hour, and I'm going to charge him therefore $60 an hour or $75 an hour, or factor in your 25 or 35% margin. And the issue with that, and this is kind of consulting at its core, right? Consulting companies have very low margins compared to software companies, probably by a factor of 2 or 3x sometimes. And the issue that you end up happening is you forget about the value that you're providing. You forget about the focus of that company that you're serving is going to take your recommendations, take your work products, wrap it into their work stream. They're going to extract value from it, and they're going to drive maybe revenue forward. And if the answer is that they're spending $1,800 with you, and this is pretty classic, and they're driving, $5 million worth of revenue on the other side, you're not getting paid very fairly for that. And that's the issue with consulting and time and material structures, because time and material structures on an hourly rate, there's an emotional limit. You're not going to pay me $10,000 an hour. It's just not going to happen, right? You might, if a highly trained intellectual property litigator might make $600-700 an hour. If you're working at some top tier firm, maybe 900, 1,000, but that's it. So if you're a top dog and you reach that top point at age 30 or 40, it's going to be really hard for you to push up against that upper ceiling. And so time and materials is a cost-based mindset, right? Because it's saying, I'm linking you to the hour that I put in, which is in effect delinking me from the value that you receive. You could be receiving 1,000 times the value off of something I tell you. And so getting yourself off of the cost basis is super crucial. And everybody falls into that trap because your number one concern is your cost, because if the costs go up, your profitability goes down, you might be out of business. So it's a natural place to get kind of spun up on. But getting out of that mindset is really key. And in services, the way you get out of that mindset is you move to work product structures. You don't sell hours anymore. You sell an analysis, you sell an assessment, you sell some sort of defined output. And that has all kinds of implications into.
And what did that look like at your past company? So it sounds like maybe you were thinking more about costs. When you embrace that new mindset of focusing on value and return on investment and the impact and kind of outcome that is connected to the work that you were doing, what changes did you actually make to your pricing plans?
Well, I remember we were selling, this is another one of those mistakes. I probably spent an extra couple of years not making the money I should have because I was making zero. So we were selling our software on a fabricated price that I had just basically made up in a spreadsheet. And there was a really long spreadsheet where every time we ran the math of paying for the developers and everything else, what was left over for my partner and I was, hey, let's see what happens next month, which was code for you're not getting paid. And so I was really having a hard time with this. And so I actually hired a sales coach. And that was sort of my first entree of getting my head into the other person's, how they might perceive all of this. And so our journey was very much selling for many years, software transactions, probably in the $5,000 to maybe 18,000 was like a mega deal for us. And then we would round out our journey selling engagements, software engagements and services in $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. I mean, completely, you sell one of those, it's just a completely different business model at that point. And it's also hugely exciting, right? Because the grind of moving that many transactions, by the time you move it and you pay your folks, there's nothing left, right? For you as the owner.
We see a lot of this actually with many of our coaching clients in our program who do the exact same thing. It's in some cases it's just the mindset, right? Not necessarily a whole bunch has to change in what you're actually delivering. It's the positioning, it's the focus, it's how you have that conversation. in your case, did you find that you actually had to do now a lot more work for that, $500,000 engagement compared to the $15,000 engagement? Or was it really just that you shifted the focus onto the value, onto the outcome, instead of just thinking about costs and limiting your potential upside?
Well, so there is a shift in expectation for sure when you get into those kind of what we call considered purchases. Just when you move from a couple hundred or a couple $1,000 to 20, 30,000 or a couple 100,000 or $1,000,000 plus. I mean, there are expectations. However, if you looked at the work stream of what you would do in both of those scenarios, they're not like, if the price was 10 times as more, the work is not 10 times as more. In fact, and that's the key, right? The key is that the wrapper and the expectations that are, it's super important at that level to have very specific dialogues with your clients about what is not in scope. And I think where things fall down as the transaction level rises is you get so excited, it's like $500,000. You're like, yeah, we're going to revolutionize your business, period. And that's like in the proposal. And now the client expects everything, right? And that's really key. So I think the skill set that you need to learn when you start getting into higher transactions is scoping. That's an absolute must have for mastering the art and the science behind sculpting words around the scope of what you're going to do and what you're not going to do and what activities are going to go through and what work products are we actually producing. And that is hugely important for buyers at that level. But none of that means you have to necessarily go reinvent a whole bunch.
Right.
You just have to describe what you're doing better with better boundaries.
In your experience, is it just as simple as being direct and clear from the get-go about what you're going to do and what you won't do? So I think sometimes consultants feel like they have to almost walk on eggshells because they don't want to pull back too much with the fear of they might lose the deal if they're saying, hey, we're not going to do all of these things. But then if they don't do that, then later on they will, inevitably face scope creep. What are some of the best practices that you've used or that you find are really important? Any advice that you can offer more specifically around how do you actually structure that scope so that you still are able to be successful in moving the project forward, but you're not putting yourself in a position where you're vulnerable to scope creep?
Well, so I think this is the sort of fundamental slice between, on one side, we have time and materials, and if I get scope creep, I just bill you more, right? Which has its own issues, right? You can upset the bandwidth constraints that you have with other clients doing that. Scope creep sometimes brings in more revenue, but it usually creates more havoc because you have to try to plan the work products. And on the other side, we have this structure that says, well, I'm not selling you Michael's time, right? Where I'll just do anything. I'm selling you this process. I'm selling you this work product, and here's what it does, and here's why it's been structured that way. And I think most consultants have an angle or an eye on things that they do that are unique, that if encapsulated or described under an hourly rate really work against that uniqueness, but if encapsulated in the other structure, a work product or a defined process, is not only better profitability, but it affords you the opportunity to describe what you just said, the boundaries around the box. When I'm selling you hours, it's really easy to break the box. You know what I mean? Like, it's really hard for me to be on an hourly call with you and say, well, I'm not going to talk about some aspect of something, because that makes consultants feel very uncomfortable, and it almost puts you in this mode of like holding back, and you don't want to hold back. So I think the consultants, you start probably with the hourly rate, but at some point you're going to do a breadth of projects enough where you're going to extract some method to the madness. And it's that method that I think most consultancies, they stop. They never really codify the method. They never, the methodology. They never really codify it in a way that can be bought differently. And until you make that transition from hours to sort of that process or structured work products, which is really hard, you're never going to get paid fairly for that. And when you make the transition to the work product, it implies that you've seen enough engagements that work product will be applicable across those engagements. And now we get into the concept of, well, I had a couple clients that are odd ducks and they really did this one-off analysis. And now we get into this discussion of, maybe that wasn't the ideal match for you, which is the other problem with consultancies, right? You have to be, you know, you have to be brutal on what is a match and what isn't. And I think what customers appreciate the most when you're sculpting and saying no, and this is out of scope and we don't do that. And I know you want to boil the ocean, but that's a bad idea. What they appreciate the most is that you have a perspective and that you have those boundaries and that you know whether or not it's a match. And so if upfront in the sales dialogue, you're saying, look, I don't know if this is a match for you, but here's how we do our work product. That's a very different dialogue than if I say, well, I have a bunch of hours over here. What do you need? Because
Right.
now I'm kind of getting dragged, by how they want to do it. And I think that I have a couple of friends that own consultancies, and in that transition point, it's super difficult. But prior to that transition point, it's kind of a mess. It's chaotic. Nothing's really standardized. Everything seems to be a one-off, and it can be really super frustrating in that stage.
Yeah, we actually just had John Werlow, the author of Built to Sell, come and talk with some of our Clarity program clients at an event we just ran, and we had a whole session on this exact topic because it's such a source of value creation in a company. But you're right, it can be a little bit messy for a period of time as you kind of cross that bridge. But once you get to the other side, it allows you to move forward with a lot more growth and a lot more opportunity. I want to talk about your current role. So you work at with software pricing partners. Really your focus is on pricing software, right? As the name implies. What do you take, or what can you take from the software pricing that you guys help in terms of how to price software and the strategy and kind of the positioning behind that? How do you apply that to your own firm? Because you guys aren't a software company, right? You're providing advisory and consulting and things of that nature to really work with your clients on how to price their software. Tell me a little bit more about how you take any best practices, anything that you see working really well in software that you've been able to embed into how you guys price working with clients.
Okay, so we monetize intellectual property, and this is a really important distinction because intellectual property can be encapsulated in many different ways. It can be created inside of a feature in a software product.
Mm-hmm.
It can be created inside of a service, and it can be also created inside of an insight. Some of our customers will analyze a bunch of environments and they'll determine with their AI algorithm that they've noticed some pattern that nobody else knows, and they'll use that to enrich either their consultant, their professional services arm, or the actual software itself. So monetizing intellectual property, monetizing capabilities is actually no different if you're a services organization. And in fact, we have clients like Booz Allen, ZS Associates, and other purebred software firms who want to get into intellectual property, want to get into software and its form of intellectual property, and are about to launch their next big product, right? And so once a year, we turn all of that know-how back on ourselves. And so we ask ourselves, are there any enhancements to our work products that we might want to add in? So this year, we actually did round out some of our analyses on the customer research side. And those are very targeted, and they address a very specific need that some of our clients have asked for in prior lives or prior engagements, and we didn't have, right? So that's where that's coming from. Secondly, when we go through and look at from services to software, we ask ourselves the question of, well, what makes our customers ideal? What are the engagements that have been really problematic, and why were they problematic, and what were the ones that were successful, and why were they so successful? And that refines our sort of gate, if you will, of who makes it in and who doesn't. So we've always enjoyed many clients being interested, and we do say no, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to say no. Especially, I can't tell you how invigorating it is you asked about mistakes earlier, having said, yes, 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 early on, and then getting that one or two clients that just suck all the bandwidth out of you, right? Just emotionally, physically, and on the support lines forever. And it's really nice when you have the confidence to know, I can see that pattern. That's a mess. That's never going to work on the sales floor. You're not ready. And to tell people that, and clients love that, by the way, who does that, right? Who would say no, right? And they'll come back, right? They'll come back when they're ready, when you're transparent with them. And so then we ask ourselves, is the lineup of our offerings, what we're putting out in the marketplace for different industry verticals, et cetera, are those aligned? And then ultimately look at our price points, and understanding pricing is less about the fee that you charge, even though I get that's what everybody wants to focus on, but it's more about what that offer is like. You know, what are those work products going to be, and why were they selected, and what is this process that I'm buying, and why am I selecting you versus any other Tom, Dick, or Harry that's out there? And then the other really important decision says, well, on what basis am I going to charge you, hourly, or is there some other way that you're going to you know, some customers these days will ask for contingency fees or for you to put some fees at risk. And would you entertain that? Would you not entertain that? And under what circumstances might that look like? So turning those back on ourselves is really hugely important because the frameworks work in that regard, but also having the space to breathe as a consultancy and being able to say maybe no, and maybe going as far, if you're okay in the COVID sense, and not suffering on the business front, to say, well, if I can fit 20 projects this year or 50 projects this year, I'm going to take one project of that 50, let's say, and it's going to be me. It's going to be my consultancy. It's going to be me going through this analysis, whatever that looks like, is hugely important, right? Otherwise, we tend to do the same thing.
That's a really, really good point. You know, question for you on this. So the company is Software Pricing Partners. Clearly, you know, it says kind of what the focus is. Yeah. Yet many of your well-known clients aren't software companies. You know, by nature, they didn't start off necessarily being a software company. I think some people might look at that name and go, you know, doesn't that limit you? Like, if you're Software Pricing Partners, that means that a manufacturing company is not going to come to you for help, or a consulting firm won't come to you for help, or somebody else in professional services won't come to you for help because they're not software companies. Yet, I don't know if you guys work with any manufacturing companies, but it sounds like you certainly work with companies that aren't pure play. They don't necessarily think of themselves or wouldn't be labeled as a software company. What are your thoughts on the strategy, or just the power behind that name? How has it served you? And the lessons or anything you could speak to in terms of, even though the name is software, you're still able to attract companies that aren't software.
Well, we chose, I mean, that name exists for a reason, because we are focused on B2B software companies. Now, you might come to us as a services organization, but if you don't have some software or designs around being in software, it's really not an ideal match for us. That doesn't mean that an industrial company that wants to, you know, monetize its cardboard, you know, and, you know, they, instead of selling you a $2 million equipment, they'll charge you every time you pull the lever and stamp out some corrugated cardboard. And so they want recurring revenue models too. That doesn't mean we won't entertain those, but that means that there are differences. For us, they are not, just because they're not ideal doesn't mean you can't bring them in. It just means that we focus and put all of our energy on a singular, you know, direction, which is B2B software companies. We're not messing with
how
B2C.
important do you think that is, Chris, for you guys, from a marketing perspective and a branding and authority building perspective, just really planting kind of, you know, your flag in the sand and being known specifically for that? Has that been a big part of the company's success?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't try to do everything. We're not trying, and we beat all of the name brand firms, right? Not all the time, but I mean, we have a really nice hit rate with going toe to toe with 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 person consultancies. Why? Because of that singular focus. We didn't water down with all this other stuff. You know, you'll never hear us on the phone mixing and matching and saying, well, we're going to do a willingness to pay survey. No, that's a B2C thing. Or we're going to do a conjoint analysis. No, that's you know, we do B2B. And so when you peg that, you know, stake in the ground and you have those marching orders, it gets rid of all the superfluous noise on the perimeter, and your message that you deliver to the customers that you want to attract, the ones that you've chosen to focus on, is light years ahead of the watered down competitors, right? And it's a really huge insight that you're hinting into here, Michael, which is, you know, we know that that name carries with it a con, software pricing, you know, oops, but it still works, right? People still seek us out because they're considering software, and they're not a software company yet. So we're happy with attracting them. Other people will seek us out, but if they're on the sales line and they've got some B2C needs, we're not really wanting to go there right now. There's
Yeah.
plenty of growth and plenty of places to move within our focus. Now later we might do that, but if we do that, you know what we're going to do? We're going to come up with another singular message and put a stake in the ground, and we're probably not going to knock the software pricing partners brand in that regard. So we're very careful with that messaging and that focus.
Yeah. No,
And
I mean,
it's
that's,
really crucial to our win rate.
I completely agree. I mean, there's a reason why we have Consulting Success as our brand name and everything that we do, the Consulting Success podcast, and we focus on consulting. It doesn't mean that we can't help people, for example, who are maybe in other areas of life coaching or, relationship coaching. Some of our materials and our practices or, different programs could certainly benefit those people, but our focus 100% are those who are providing consulting and advisory services, and they might be doing some strategic coaching, but it's typically with organizations, and they might be nonprofits or multi-billion-dollar organizations, but there's some form of organization. And yes, it might mean, as you said, that for some people, right, it doesn't necessarily resonate, but for the ones that we really want to attract, it resonates very, very well with them. So I'm completely aligned with you on that. Before we wrap up, Chris, I really want to hear about what you're doing from a marketing perspective right now. What is working best at your firm to attract new clients, to build that pipeline? Are there, one or two things that you would say, yeah, hands down, these are definitely key drivers for our growth?
Yeah, I think so. For us, word of mouth is huge. There are pockets of software companies whose executive teams, I don't care what ebook you produce, you'll never get into them unless they ask one of their buddies who happen to have done an engagement, and you get that in. And so the first key piece to the puzzle is whatever product or service that you are creating, and that goes back to that discussion about the focus on the customer and asking the questions and really staying the course there, has to deliver, right? I mean, there are people in our space, wonderful marketing, but when they go through the process and they experience the outcome, there's really not much of an outcome to speak of, and those engagements are terminated, and the upside's not there, and the success story is not there. And you can tell the difference in a success story that's generic. I worked with Michael and it was amazing. That's very different than I worked with Michael and within 12 months I have 3 times the revenue.
Sure.
That's a very different kind of, and you want the latter, not the former, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And so word of mouth comes from, outrageously great experiences where people feel it in themselves to go out of their way to recommend you. And that's the crucial piece. Okay. So if you have that, then you have word of mouth. You don't need to run the largest blog in the world from a marketing perspective. The second thing that we do with marketing is podcasts like these, right? To spread awareness. And we don't, we're lucky in that we don't choose marketing, how they do the whole top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom of the funnel, and that whole game. We put out thought leadership. We've been around for almost 40 years, so there's a huge amount of companies that come our way, and the things that we do now are more about awareness and more about education. And I think,
What does that look like when you say awareness and education? So totally, I mean, I understand the word of mouth and the referrals, and you do great work, right? That typically there's big upside and benefit in that. You jump on podcasts like this from time to time. What else is your company doing? What else is the firm doing to grow business?
um, you mean like a tactical sort of item, or are you just talking
Yeah, is
about
there
the general
anything else
strategy?
that you're doing right now that you'd say this is really moving the needle?
I think that the thing that moves the needle the most for us is in our world, we have to dig very deep into the customer's environment, because what we're doing, frankly, can put them out of business if you do it wrong. And so the accuracy and the risk mitigation is really crucial. And we spend a lot of time inventing new processes, trying to be innovative on that front so that that message is really resonating with our customers. And we've got that really fine tuned. Outside of that, our general approach is one more of education. And this is a little bit related to the style maybe of the executive team of the consultancy. But I think if you're sort of black box and super duper stuff happening back here, but I can't really talk about it, that doesn't really resonate very well with buyers today. Educating people, like for example, in our world, people can do competitive intelligence.
Right.
So competitive intelligence can happen in two ways. It can happen ethically, it can happen unethically. And some firms choose to go out and mystery shop their competitors. So I would find out, Michael, you compete with this firm. So I, as your service provider, go call that firm, pretend like I'm a buyer, waste that salesperson's time, get a proposal from them, and I come back to you, Michael, and say, look at how they're charging, and you should have a reaction to that. That's actually a violation of the US Espionage Act of 1996. And we did this wonderful piece that we sent out over onto LinkedIn, which a lot of our audience is on. And that thing went all over the place because it hints on what everybody does internally when they're curious. It hits on ethics, and it hits on this idea of what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. And we have a position, we have a perspective on that, right? And so from our reach of our blog, which is pretty big, we have very distinct perspectives, and those perspectives diverge greatly from the sort of current dogma. But those perspectives have emerged from that focus. And because we have that focus and because we have that depth of knowledge, we can have a perspective and say, look, I understand that everybody else is doing it this way, but I wouldn't do that. And here's why you're opening up yourself to federal and common law lawsuits, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that those kinds of pieces work really well for us and keep us top of mind and keep us relevant. And that sort of churning of perspective coming from our projects and our learnings, all that's fueling that engine that keeps cranking. And I wish I could say it was one thing that we were doing, but
No,
I can tell you what we're not doing. What we're not doing is plowing out a crap ton of content, trying to have the biggest blog on the planet and trying to SEO game Google and all like that.
right.
It doesn't cut it anymore.
Yeah, makes sense. Chris, I want to thank you for coming on here today and sharing a bit of your story and what you guys are up to. I also want to make sure people can learn more about you and your company's work. What's the best website address for people to go to learn more and see what you guys are up to?
Softwarepricing.com. And Michael, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Pleasure.